First on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If you pull 5H and put it under 6D, what is that?
Put it under 6. Okay. Approval of agenda is amended. Do I have a motion? Is there a second? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay. Okay. Chair's comments. Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending today's meeting. I want to bring you up to date on the activities relating to the HRBT project. HRBT project funding agreement advisory committee met on October 5th. I want to thank Senator Wagner, Delegate Jones, Mayor Alexander, and Mayor Hrtac for attending. Delegate Jones and Senator Wagner were selected to represent the committee in a meeting with Secretary Valentine, Secretary Lane, and Commissioner Birch to discuss fund strategies in relation to the HRBT project. The Secretary of Transportation and her staff have since exchanged ideas with Hrtac leadership regarding potential funding strategies. Discussions are ongoing. Developing a solution or solutions is a work in progress. Hrtac is endeavoring and to have specific actions, information available before the December 13th commission meeting. Before closing with my comments, please join me in welcoming our newest member of the commission, Robert Dreyer, Mayor-elect of Virginia Beach. Bobby Dreyer has been a member of the Virginia Beach City Council since 2004. He is a liaison between the government body and the Majority Business Council, Human Rights Commission, and the Process Improvement Task Force. He is a home care physician therapist with a master's degree in public administration and a PhD in organized leadership.
It's a privilege to be among you. Thank you.
Also welcome Mr. Seth Miller, CTB Urban Member at Large, and Mr. Stephen Johnson, CTB Rule Member at Large. It is great to see you join Mr. Malvern at the commission table today. Thank you, and now let's move on to the rest of the meeting. Okay. Moving on to the consent calendar.
Mr. Chairman, one consent item that I wanted to call to your attention was a typo in consent item 5F. The actual fiscal impact and the motion need to read $1,983,000. The suggested motion had a typographical error in it, so the fiscal impact is correctly stated, and the motion should read with the $1.983 million number in it. So on with your consent item, sir. 5-inch removed to 660. Yes, sir.
All right. Do I have a recommendation for approval of the consent calendar? Consent items. So second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right, now moving on to 6, action items.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you all, the Commission, are very well aware, by state statute, the Auditor of Public Accounts has authority to conduct the annual audit of the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. Through the engagement that APA has put into place, they use a third-party outside firm known as PB Maris LLP, who was engaged by the APA to perform our annual audit. The auditor reported that there are no material weaknesses or deficiencies in any of the internal controls or processes of Hrtac's financial activity, and all information was free of any material misstatements. Today we have Mr. Mike Garber from PB Maris here today that will step to the podium to give his brief presentation and also give us an update on the activities of the audit and, of course, steps moving forward from that point. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, for that introduction. I'll try to keep my comments brief, but I will answer questions that you have at any time throw your hand up, interrupt me, you can wait to the end, whatever works best for you. I don't think I have any present slides to go over with you, but in a nutshell, as Kevin was talking about, so we conducted our audit and we issue several opinions on the financial statement and compliance. The financial statement opinion is an unmodified opinion, a clean opinion. That's what we're looking for. And our opinion on compliance and internal controls was also an unmodified or clean opinion. So we continue to be able to issue those opinions, and that's a great thing to be able to keep those as unmodified. Some of the changes that you may have noticed from prior year's financial statements, we do have a small little sentence on the front cover now. It says Hrtac, a component unit of the Commonwealth of Virginia. That was not there before. There's been some disclosures added and some things done just a little bit differently. The Commonwealth of Virginia, when they go through their planning and their audit process and procedures, they have to analyze and look at all of the different boards and commissions and areas and foundations around the state of Virginia to see what their fiscal impact is on the state's financial statements and the state's capital. And they determined this year that based on the amount of dollars and road work and things that we're doing, and then the state takes over those assets and maintains them and they become assets of the state, that Hrtac is now a component unit of the Commonwealth. And what does that mean for you? It means very little. It means I add some words that says we're a component unit. It means that they now send me a couple letters during the year that I have to say that I'm now just not independent of you, but I'm independent of the state. So that's something that happens for me to do. They also will, when they issue their financial statements, ask me if there's any subsequent events that have occurred that could be material to the state's CAFR, and I'll answer those questions with them. Of course, I'll have to be in touch with Kevin for that because I don't know everything that happens in the next 2 or 3 months since year end, but we'll be discussing that. So those are some of the things that happen behind the scenes. But overall, it really doesn't change our audit approach. It doesn't change the things that we do when we're issuing your financial statements. We did have one small transaction this year. I think you're aware of. We issued almost $500 million of debt. And we do have that accounted for and displayed in the financial statements and everything that goes along with that. And I have a feeling that we've got a lot more coming. And so we're going to work with Kevin and the staff at Hrtac and the PDC to make sure we get that reported, all those funds put into the right buckets, and we get those things tracked accordingly. A couple of the other items we always like to communicate. There's another, I think, a separate letter outside of the financials. There was a letter that was addressed to the Honorable Board of Commissioners. That letter just states some of the things that we're required to communicate to you if we had any issues during the audit, which we did not. If we had problems gathering information, getting answers to our questions, we did not have any of those types of issues. It also lays out the rules and the guidelines that we have to follow as auditors as part of that. It talks about significant estimates, as well as if we had any audit entries. And there were a few audit entries listed in there. I'm not going to go through those. I don't consider them a systemic issue or problems. They're just a few things that we found while we were doing our work. With that, I don't have much else prepared. I think the audit, besides for a couple of those items, went very well and very similar to the prior years. So with that, I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, does the component unit, you talked about, we issued some bonds, is there a connection between our bonding capacity and the state's now that we're a component unit, and how does that work?
To my knowledge, there is no interconnectivity there. The state has their guidelines and the things that they have to follow. Hrtac has their own, and to my knowledge, those bonds will not impact what the state's guidelines are as far as issuing them.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, any more questions? I had a comment.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, well, thank you. Following on with the component unit declaration determination by the comptroller of the state of Virginia, first of all, I'd like to thank, we were notified of this at the 11th hour that the comptroller had determined that Hrtac would be a component unit of the Commonwealth under certain Gatsby rules, which are the accounting standards that the Commonwealth of Virginia follows. Upon the notification of that, which was a 2-sentence email without a return, really contact information, I immediately notified Chairman and also Senator Wagner and Delegate Jennings, because I felt like they had some very good contact. Also notified Councilman Klima, who was really great assistance to us in working through the interpretation of what had occurred. But I wanted to acknowledge and thank also in Richmond, the Secretary of Transportation's office became very involved in this, as well as VDOT, because the assets were on VDOT's books. And because Hrtac is making improvements through its financial investments for congestion relief in the region, we are also creating, as a secondary to the public good which is purchased, which is congestion relief, we're actually adding and contributing assets to the Commonwealth through the I-64 interstate projects. Having said that, Secretary Lane and also Deputy Secretary Donahue also were very involved in this and working with the comptroller in narrowing the determination more down to Gadsby to where it just would not be appropriate but misleading if they didn't include the book and the liabilities with the assets that were created through this event. So I'll turn the floor over to the counselor here who was obviously very heavily from a legal perspective involved in this. And Tom, I also wanted to thank you for all of the work that you put into this as well. There was a real monumental effort to understand what happened and where we get from there.
Sure, and to Mr. Miller's question, the Gadsby standards have 2 different routes that they go down to determine whether or not Hrtac would be a component unit. And when we originally received the determination, the support we received indicated that the interpretation was being mandated because the economic resources of Hrtac were being interpreted as for the benefit of the Commonwealth, and as if the Commonwealth had the ability to access the economic resources of Hrtac. We filed an objection to that characterization. The comptroller issued a subsequent letter to us indicating that they agreed that Hrtac had its own sovereign powers and that it is its own political subdivision, not an agency of the state, but that nonetheless they used a different prong of the Gadsby standards, which, as Mr. Page indicated, was a more general subjective interpretation that would be misleading to exclude Hrtac from the Commonwealth's financial statements because of the economic or the capital assets that get booked once our projects are done. So it's going to be a year-to-year determination as to whether or not our projects are so intertied with the Commonwealth for purposes of whether or not the Commonwealth's CAFR needs to include Hrtac as part of it.
Any questions?
Are we seeing a similar thing in Northern Virginia?
I think the easiest explanation is that Northern Virginia doesn't have the volume of projects that they're doing in which the money from their fund is ending up in capital improvements that end up being state assets. So that's why it's going to be a state year-by-year determination at this point.
Mr. Chair, question. So the Northern Virginia does not have the same number of projects as do we. Nevertheless, the same part of the code that carves out the exception for both Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia to be able to allocate these funds towards our transportation projects. So I'm obviously not being an attorney. I'm curious, how does it that the physical projects that are not one and the same, and yet it's the same aspect of the code, how is it that our money would go to part of the Commonwealth's revenues and theirs may not?
Well, I don't disagree with you. We're talking about the application of an accounting standard, and we made those points, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the comptroller said that it was a subjective determination as to whether or not it would be misleading to exclude Hrtac. So there's not really a distinction as a legal basis between us and Northern Virginia. It's just in applying the accounting standard to the allocation of the resources at this point.
Mr. Chairman, follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
In light line of this issue, are you of the opinion that perhaps we need to have clarification in the code that explicitly states that this money shall stay in this community, and that all principals, including accounting principals, shall determine that these funds are applied to the local projects solely?
It's my opinion that the comptroller's interpretation of how the GASB standard applies to the presentation of their financial report doesn't change the sovereign powers of Hrtac and what it can do with the money.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question here. Just for clarification, follow Doug Yancey's comment. So are we discussing just the accounting process, or are we talking about the legality of actually who has control of the money?
It's the accounting process.
So we do not the comptroller is nowhere in here said that the money that we collect and have in our budget and any tolling we're gonna collect on it goes to the state.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Devil's always in the details. I'm not sure why we would care unless there was a material impact to us going forward. Whether that's who owns the money or how that impacts our bond capacity. Are there other items that we should be concerned about? Are there other issues other than just purely reflecting that statement? And secondly, is Northern Virginia excluded because most of their maintenance would be paid out, once the assets, the maintenance would be paid out of toll funds as opposed to regular state funds? Is that the distinction that the comptroller is making?
Well, I'll address the Northern Virginia piece because I challenged that when I was, well, actually Delegate Jones sent the challenge through the House Appropriations legislative staff. And the answer that came back was that NVTA, Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, and NVTC, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, both make improvements in a connected network that are primarily transit, pedestrian, and other multimodal projects. They're not really technically adding to the interstate system, which has a greater good in the highway network. But my point back was, and to answer your kind of address your question about Northern Virginia, I'm not sure they can fend that off when they start applying the $200 million to the Route 28 interchange project, which will be an asset of the Commonwealth. So as Councilman Gleeman noted, it's an annual assessment through GASB as they're working through the annual audit of the Commonwealth. And I think the comptroller will probably have to take a very close look at that because we'll be keeping an eye on that interpretation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, yes, sir.
and you may have mentioned this and I just missed it. So with this designation, would our funds and our bonding be calculated into the Commonwealth's 9A, B, C, or D bonding calculations?
I do not know the specific answer. I do not believe that it has any impact on the state's bonding. I think that they're looked at as separate political bodies for that purpose, but I don't know the answer definitively.
Yes, sir.
Isn't that a critical issue? It seems like it'd be a critical issue that we ought to get the answers and act accordingly.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that. I mean, our state bond ratings are very closely monitored. We just came back from appropriations yesterday where we were talking about limitations on the amount of bonds that we could issue. If we need to have some very specific clarifications on how this is being calculated into that.
Mr. Chair, I just add one more thing. I'm not sitting on appropriations, but nevertheless, just in respect to the taxpayer dollars and the people that are here, I think it's fair to say, in conjunction with that, just also for clarification, is the state looking at, may or may not say this, but I think it's fair to ask, are you looking at part of the state bonding capabilities? Are you looking at some stream of revenue from this area to the general fund as part of an overall leveraging package that the state would then issue for other transportation projects throughout the state of Virginia? So here we are potentially issuing our own bonds for our own projects, but if they're looking at our funds as part of an overall larger package, then we need to be aware of that as well.
I would just point out that the HRTF is a non-reverting fund, so in my opinion, I would not think it would be reverting back to the state and being considered part of that, but we'll get clarification.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I guess to the point, as I've been listening to this conversation, we're hearing what could and should and couldn't happen, and yet nevertheless, I'm starting to think that we have state code that clarifies how this money gets spent, and yet I'm being told that the accounting principles are such that this money may be. So I think we need to have very clear understanding. Quite candidly, we need to be able to have it so that a 5-year-old in an elementary school understands that their parents' tax dollars, where they go, how they get spent, and what transportation projects are they going to pay for, ours, theirs, or all of ours. I think it's easy to get into the weeds and the minutia of business lingo, but I think we need to have a very simple, very clear understanding of where this money is coming from, where this money is going, where this money is being bonded, where this money is being appropriated, and whether or not we're going to follow the code or we're going to follow these accounting principles we're speaking of.
We'll have a presentation from bond counsel to help us through that.
Any other questions?
But uniquely, I just wanted to mention a component unit of the Commonwealth is also HRSD, which also raised our eyebrows. Still can't figure that one out, but well, the sanitation district itself is. But we'll certainly have some better dialogue for us prepared for the December meeting.
Mike, thank you very much. Appreciate all your time and effort in this. Okay, now we're looking for approval of this item. So, have a motion for approval? So moved. Second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right. Now we'll move on to the next, which is 5F, it's now 6B.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's 5H, sir. Thank you. But we're in luck today because we have Morteza Fiezon here, Deputy Secretary of Transportation. I'll ask Mr. Deputy Secretary to come to the podium to talk in case there are questions about the revenue and investment grade traffic and revenue study that's underway in the region here to bring some background to this. And thank you, Dr. Price, for bringing this out so we can have this conversation, clear up any concerns and also get some input from the commissioners as well. As you all may remember, and Mr. Shepmiller may remember this as well, when we chaired the Funding Strategies Advisory Committee now about 3 years ago, Hrtac actually engaged CDM Smith, who is the traffic and revenue consultant that the commission has used, to determine what were the potential revenues of High Rise Bridge and Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel so that we could incorporate them in our funding plan, which is the deliberate numbers that we're using today were out of CDM Smith's initial work for the commission. Following that initial level investment study, when you look at toll roads, you have to then do what's referred to as an investment grade traffic and revenue study. And so what the Commonwealth of Virginia through the CTV and VDOT did was they took the effort themselves, since they were in the process of doing the reversible hot lane project down here in Hampton Roads, that they expanded they had to do the investment grade TNR for that as well for the revolving toll fund. But also in the process of that, they started what you all may recall as the network toll study for the entire region. Has been explained and discussed very much at length at the Transportation Planning Organization level. But what we're missing here at Hrtac is we need to do the investment grade traffic and revenue study on the water crossings, because that's what we initially used in our funding plan and still carry in our funding plan. And there was some discussion at our September meeting, as you may recall, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that Senator Wagner brought forward which is now known as 3 tests of the investment grade traffic and revenue study model for the region. What we did was we pulled out at Finance Committee Chair Wagner's request, we pulled out 3 scenarios that could be applied using the model that Mr. Fiezon's consultant, and the same as ours, I may know, CDM Smith, that would pull out the data that we needed as we went forward with providing a definitive and very reliable revenue estimate for our funding plan for Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. So this effort is what I would like to characterize as an effort that we need to move forward with, and understanding with the background I just gave you, this is the next level step for us to generate the data we need for our funding plan for the revenues that will be generated under the tolling of just the water crossings. So where we are with the three scenarios is scenario one is a scenario where on a 24/7 basis, all users of the hot managed lanes for the HRBT water crossing project are charged for the use of those lanes. A second scenario is where during off-peak hours, all users of the hot managed lanes for the HRB2 water crossing are charged for those lanes, such as HOB2 or HOB3. Free use would be limited to peak hours only. Following that meeting, we went further with the Finance Committee Chair Wagner and explaining what we needed. And a third scenario was added where only hot lanes at the water crossings of HRBT and High Rise Bridge are tolled under what would be considered the hot network tolling plan. So I communicated those three scenarios to the Deputy Secretary, who's the project manager with the CDM Smith effort. And the model that's being developed that we're using with CDM Smith was funded by $1.5 million of the revolving toll account, which will be repaid by the toll revenues when that time comes and the tolls are applied. To additional characterization of the three scenarios would cost $50,000. And Mr. Vieson is here today to answer any questions you may have about the network model that's being built, and then of course where we're going with our three scenarios that we feel is essential to understand what is the revenue that we will pull out of tolling just the water crossings, carrying forward with what's in our funding plan. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn the floor over to you for any questions the Commission may have for me or Mr. Vieson.
Any questions?
I have one. The third scenario, are there any time restrictions on that? Is that 24/7, third scenario?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Mr. Deputy Secretary, that I might have missed?
No, I think you were right on point, Kevin, and it's my honor to be here today. And as Executive Director Dave mentioned, the model has been created. It was almost a 6-month effort, but we have the model now and we can run different scenarios. So we got a request from Hrtac to run those 3 scenarios. It's probably going to take between 4 to 6 weeks and $50,000 to run those scenarios. And we should be able to report back to you within 4 to 6 weeks after we have received confirmation that we want us to move forward and start that study.
One further question is, once these scenarios are reached, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, the deciding body of this would be TPO through and then HRT.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to be the 5th grader that Senator Yancey was talking about.
Yes, indeed.
To put this in plain English, are we talking about an additional study over and above what we've already asked for? Now, we talked about, Secretary Valentine came down and made it very clear that they were going to do a study about the phases, and that piece, Jefferson Avenue, whatever we got now, going all the way up to 199. Okay. My understanding was that they were doing a whole study all the way around Bowers Hill. Does that not include the water crossing?
It does include the water crossings, but it's a connected network. And what we're asking to do is, now that the model's been built for the network, we're asking that they turn off the sections except for the ones we want to toll as a region.
Okay, that was an option I remember Senator Wagner had talked about. And I
Right,
think,
and this is the continuation of how we go to answer the Senator Wagner options.
okay.
Can I add something to just to clarify? There are 2 separate studies that are happening right now. One study is traffic and revenue, which is what we're talking about. That study is going to tell us how much toll revenue we can collect based on different scenarios that we're looking at. The second study is an operational analysis that is going to look at the network from operations perspective, flow of traffic, safety improvements and so on. So you can put the results of these two studies based on different scenarios. One is going to tell you how much revenue you can collect. The other one is going to tell you how the network is going to operate from a safety perspective, operation perspective.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Secretary Valentine, and we have it in the minutes, she said that the study would be, basically it's going to schedule to be done at the end of November. So is this still on track? And because there was the option, and I'm not sure where the trestle bit comes into the discussion here, because there was some legal parts of that. So there's kind of two parts to the question. One, are we still going to get a study to the staff in the end of November? I mean, I'm assuming that's what's going to happen. And the second part is, when can we as a body get some indication of where this, other than, they're working it, as to some of the detail of the funding plan for the trestle, which is part and parcel of the whole thing, but some legalities here. So there's two parts to that.
Yeah, I'll address the first part, obviously first. And the overall network investment grade traffic and revenue study, which will lay out the network that you're just described, is going to be coming out, Cortez, in like next, 4 or 5 weeks tops, something like that. The current run.
We have a report.
Yeah, you have a report.
That we have already studied. Those are the scenarios that we looked at. That is going to be ready by the end of November.
Right.
We can share that with you.
Right.
The scenarios, additional scenarios you're asking is going to take about 4 to 6 more weeks, and that's probably going to come to you sometime in December.
So to boil that down, the region will know what the entire network can generate revenue central for the entire network in November. Probably come to you and say TPO meeting. I'd say that probably come make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, TPO, you might want to make sure you put that down as an agenda item. And us likewise. And then we at Hrtac are now working to develop the pencil point funding plan for how we're going to fund HRBT. And if the TPO comes out in December and says, we only want the water crossings funded, we won't have an answer for you unless we do this 50,000 stuff. Because our funding plan is reliant on revenues from the tolling, but the tolling of the segments that we anticipate that the TPO will probably select. Not trying to predetermine or pre-decision an outcome, but we want to be there to inform you of what the potential impact of the outcome will be. So if we only drop back to the water crossings, the network study doesn't have the scenarios that we will need as a region to have the conversation of what if we only do the 2 water crossings, HRBT and high-rise bridges tolls. That's where we're going.
But how, okay, I mean, I know we want to separate the two out, but how's the trestle part going to play? Because we can't build a tunnel and fund a tunnel that goes nowhere. So when are we going to get information for this committee? So we're not, in other words, I know that Senator Wagner and I believe Chris Jones, Dr. Jones, they were working to try to figure this, sticky wicket out and figure out how to make it work. But I don't want it to show up in this committee here, and we got to vote on something that we've not heard or know nothing about, and all of a sudden we're forced to vote on something we have no opinion on. So and then we have to deal with the tolling issue and crossing issue. So when are we going to get like hints of what's going on there?
And so we're hoping to have information back for our December meeting on December 13th. That'll set a decision tree in place from the TPO and Hrtac. I don't know whether the you two chairs have had a chat yet, or I'm not trying to get out ahead of you two, but you might want to think about a joint meeting in December so everyone hears the same report, same time, same everything. And then we have to go back ourselves once we know and understand if you go with the TPO in a direction that pulls out one of our 3 scenarios, then we'll know by our March meeting what that revenue will generate, because we have to have a funding plan in place if they go under contract and award a contract for HRBT. So that's kind of the layup that I kind of see coming based on where we are at the time of the DNR study.
Okay, so I mean that's a critical point. I think, and kind of hits to some of the discussion that So we will meet, I'm almost positive we're gonna have a joint meeting, in December, because we gotta get the contract out to get this tunnel going. But to have the whole piece and understanding all the funding issues related to it is gonna be critical at that time also. And if anything that leads up to that, I think is gonna be, it's gonna help the commissioners be able to understand what they're voting on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
We'll have, you're right, and our funding plan will be firmed up probably at the March meeting before they make the award to CTV. Yeah, we'll have it in place.
We'll get that third scenario by the end of December, so it won't be by December 13th.
Again, and then, you know, if the timing is what it is, we may have to call a special meeting.
We've had a special meeting. That's
All right.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I might be going back to survey for answer. I think that, does this not all go back to the original discussion we were having at the beginning as to where these how these revenues are considered and whether they're considered a part of the state and whatever? Because we all know there's the Elizabeth River crossing piece that comes into play here and added capacity and how you pay for all that. So again, all these scenarios are great, but I think at the bottom of the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, more likely, we need to know how these revenues are going to be distributed, how they're going to be coming all back here, what happens to them. And I don't really think we know sitting around this table yet exactly how that goes. At least I don't.
I think we'll have better definition on the December 13th discussion. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I think I am mindful of the fact that this is a very complex matter. And to be sure, I think there's always a concern, I know just from my personal business experiences, that oftentimes there are people who engage in conversation in a meeting and they just nod politely as the nuances of the contract are discussed. I think because in large part they don't want to admit they have no idea what the person's talking about. And until something goes wrong, then they go into great detail to understand the nuances of what was put together. I will volunteer myself, so that nobody else has to, that I appreciate that this is such a unique, complicated, and a very hard to understand matter that it takes a lot of time. I think it would be very beneficial for all the members, and obviously for the public and the taxpayers and for those in the media that want to have a greater appreciation for what's going on. When the time comes for us to have this meeting where we can discuss at length the nuances, the complexities, I know government loves charts and graphs, and we joked before that you'll have a chart that says everything's going down, if you flip it upside down, everything's going well. I think it would be very helpful to all the members and the citizens who are attending these meetings to just have a very simple page, if you will, a cheat sheet, for lack of a better expression, where it simply says these terms. When you hear accounting terms or some things that are referenced, this is what it means, this is how it applies, this is where the money's coming from. They're suggesting the money goes here, the money goes there. I think it's something that people can at least look down on and say, okay, I understand now what this accounting principle that they keep referring to means. I know it might be a little bit additional work for your staff, and I apologize, but I just think it's so helpful that for all the members here, as we're walking through the complexities and the nuances, it goes back to the old sports expression of keep winning simple. And I think if we are all on the same page, and if we all understand the terms that are being floated about, and we all have an appreciation for that, as well as the citizens who are here, that maybe don't deal with this on a day-to-day basis and would really be grateful for this, I think it would be very helpful for all of us to be able to be on the same page, speak the same language, understand what all this means, and then be able to walk through what the terms are that we have to figure out how we can build this bridge, how we can fix the trusses, and then obviously where our taxpayer dollars locally are going for our local projects.
I've agreed, and thank you for wanting to head that up in Hrtac, if you will, and two of y'all come up with that. I think that would simplify the whole thing, because there's a lot of moving parts in this, on not just the three scenarios, but payments and all, and that's where they're going and where they're going to start. So it's a lot. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes right now as far as trying to figure all these out and get some of these questions answered and back to you. So we'll keep going as hard as we can on that and get you all the information you need. And if there's anything additional you need, don't be scared to reach out to any of us, and we'll direct the page and ask him the questions at any time in the month that something comes up.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chairman Hippel, only have served a few months on this commission. I do have a question in reference to the tolling aspect. Are we able to consider giving variable rates based on where the vehicles are titled? My point is that we have local citizens that are paying the sales tax on some of this infrastructure, if you will, that maybe we want to capture those people who aren't part of that tax base that are using the system. So my point is, have we looked at variable tolling based on where the vehicles are titled? Is that even an option?
We haven't looked yet, but we'll certainly raise that question with those in Richmond who are helping us with the study, and also we'll make sure we can legally address that as well.
I mean, that might give us some other options, and tolling a larger portion, if it doesn't impact the local citizens as much or at all in some places. I mean, I would think that would be very helpful.
And with the third scenario, that's why we're looking at the two crossings, because that impacts the citizens less than the whole region. So that's why we want to put that third option in order to say, hey, these are components that definitely need to be paid for, and the rest of the circle, it may not be productive. And so when we get the first two reports out, and for our December meeting, a third one at the end of December, that will give us a scenario of what we're looking at as far as cash-wise and what would be a better option for this group.
Okay, I just want to make sure I made my point that I was looking at if we could do variable rates.
Yeah, right, for the locals. I think that's a good idea.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
That's a unique and interesting idea. I like it. Does the study that the model that we're cranking through now, I'm sorry, is the model that we're cranking through now able to capture that kind of information, so that if you did a projection to see what the toll rates might bring at the water crossings only, you could separate the local folks, give them the title, with the vehicles titled versus the non-local folks, or I say the non-regional folks. Is the model able to do that?
I don't think that the model, as is today, can differentiate between local people versus people who are from out of this region. So I'll go back and ask the consultant. I
Because
know that.
otherwise, how do you make the decision if you don't know the answer to this?
And I think, too, it might be something that we may be able to look at on the Easy Pass.
The Easy Pass ties to your VIN, so the information in theory is out there. They got the VIN associated with the Easy Pass with a license plate or something. It's associated with the Easy Pass, and you'll be able to tie that back to the locality that the VIN is registered in. And that could give you that information, but I'm not sure the model, as you have it now, Mr. Deputy Secretary, would allow us to know what that number is. And you sort of would need to know what that number is in order to make a good decision with this body, but anyway.
Good question.
I'll go back and check on that. I know that they have done extensive data collection. I just don't know when they did the data collection, they really distinguished between people in this region compared to people out of the region. I just need to go back and look at the data batch that they have and figure that out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Ready to go now. So item 6B in the amended agenda calls for a motion that the commission authorizes the executive director to engage with VDOT to provide funding to support the Hrtac requested analysis of 3 tests of the Hampton Roads Hot Lane Network investment grade traffic and revenue study.
So moved.
Second. Second. All in favor, say by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Nay. Any abstentions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Moving forward, Senator Wagner is away today at a Senate Finance Committee retreat, so he was apologetic, as well as I believe Delegate James has been tied up himself doing some work with his involvement in Richmond. Moving forward, before you is the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund financial report for the period ending September 30th, 2018. As Senator Wagner normally does, I'll go ahead and make the report for him that all bank balances today are now rolled up, because we have another month in front of us now in data, to $1,127,088,717. As you all know, to see the document before you, a couple of improvements that I would like to point out to you all. Some input from the commissioners, so I do appreciate that. Page 2 of the report, you can see it's a little more graphically depicted. Delegate Yancey, as you know, I mentioned earlier, folks like graphics, so we're trying to become more graphic oriented for you. And also some very deliverance about where we are with our accounting portfolio. One point I'd like to make out to you is that we made some changes in the Union General account. That has been moved into now and upgraded into an interest-bearing account, since we're now moving a good bit of money through there since we sold the bonds. So again, we're trying to maximize the ability, even on a short-term overnight or a couple of day situation where that Union General account is used, we'll be earning interest on it. Mr. Chairman, that's what I had before you in the Finance Committee's monthly report, and we'll turn the floor back over to you for item 7B, Mr. Paul Fabian.
Okay, all right, now, Administrator Hall and Director Hrtac are going to give us a report on the project updates.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to remind everybody, we still have $1 billion, over $1 billion in construction currently, more than anywhere else in the state. I can tell you that across all fronts, we're really pleased with the progress that our contractors are making on these large port projects in the region. On the south side, many of you, as you travel over the high-rise bridge, you see the activity that's going on there. That is a continuation of our pile test program protocol. Contractor continues to work through that ahead of schedule, I might add. Good news, we did receive our 408 and 404 permits from the Corps of Engineers. We're waiting on the last step of that, which is a joint permit action from the Coast Guard, and then we'll be able to begin work in the river, which we expect sometime mid-December time frame. So you'll see the contractor starting to work on the fender system. We'll lay out the fender system, put the fender system in, and then we'll start in earnest driving piles in the river in preparation for the pile cap construction in the river. You've also probably noticed some of the construction going on regarding the Great Bridge Boulevard abutment work. So you see some of that shoulder strengthening work there and some of the sheet piles going in. Moving up to the 264 interchange work. Again, we're about 50% complete with all the deck pours on the first set of 2 bridges there. Contractors moving along. Obviously, we've got some weather challenges the last week or so here. Also notice the signage, overhead signs, and the sound walls going up if you're traveling westbound there on 64. That work is proceeding well on schedule, as well as on the phase 2 piece of the project, really starting to ramp up the efforts on the Newtown Road Bridge approaches. A lot of the preliminary work for the what we call the subgrade strengthening, some pile driving activity there, and getting prepared for our overburden, where we actually are building the embankments for those approaches. Moving up to the peninsula, segment 2 moving along very well. Alan Meyer has been very aggressive in their paving. We're trying to get all of the paving work we can done before, really they'll be shut down due to temperature. So both from the full depth reclamation, that's where they're going in and milling up the entire subgrade and completely repairing that, and the paving. That's all now in this, what we call segment 2, or phase 2 of the project, as well as sound wall construction going up there. You see here the golf course there on that segment, on the segment 2 project. On segment 3, We're also looking at getting our 408 and 404 permits from the Corps late November, which will allow us to begin work on the critical path item for that project, which is a replacement of the Queens Creek Bridge. That's on track. As well as we just got the final sound wall studies back, which is sort of, there's two parts of that. There's an initial piece, and then there's a second final study piece. And we've added roughly about 5,000 feet of sound wall on the westbound side and about 4,000 feet of sound wall on the eastbound side. All covered within the project budget, but I know that's been an issue with some of the constituents out in that area. So that was good news last night. We had a public meeting out there in Williamsburg area. But all of our westbound barriers will be in place probably by the end of next week. So that'll start in earnest all the work on the inside of the westbound lane. And you'll start to see the shoulder strengthening work pick up in the eastbound lane, which is in preparation to shift traffic over as well. So very pleased with the progress of those projects. You know, we keep very close control on the environmental piece of that, obviously, which continues to be a challenge from a site-specific standpoint. But schedule-wise, all of these projects remain on schedule for completion. The one thing I'd also like to mention, and Kevin mentioned it, was the hot lane system-wide operational study. That will be managed out of the Hampton Roads District. I will be coming back to this body sometime in the spring of next year with our analysis, and that is a totally collaborative effort. We've got members of the TPO involved in the study team, as well as Hrtac. Really, the intent of this is to look at a couple of things to provide and inform the board on how we're going to proceed with putting the system together, and that is the performance of the hot lanes with the general purpose lanes, how we're going to get efficiency out of that, and what types of efficiency we could see out of that. Identifying the other operational challenges, specifically things like clarity of access points and transition points, which I know have been a great deal of discussion on where those are going to be and how those are going to work. So this study is really, you know, at the high level to begin to put some of those pieces together, so when we come before the board, we're all talking about sort of laying factual information so we can make good decisions moving forward on how we perceive putting the hot system together in this area. We will be looking at the area north of the 664 interchange on 64. That's really understanding that the board has not approved that as part of the system, clear on that, but it's really just to look at how would all of that transition into the system south of that. So it's really just from an operational perspective what we're looking at for the study and putting the models together. One last thing I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is introduce a new member of our team. She's not really new, and I'm going to surprise her. That's Robin Greer. Robin is coming to us from the central office. She's been here a couple of months. But Robin brings a real wealth of sort of strategic planning, and she'll be working with Hrtac and the TPO as we look at putting our long-range plans together and executing that as a partner.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you.
And look forward to working with you. And Administrator, thank you for all the work you do, not only for the region, but with this group as well, and working with us to move transportation forward. Love what's going on the interstate, how quick that's moving. It's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that everything is on schedule and moving forward. Our joint sign that we normally put up on our projects, and do you know when that'll be put in over at the high-rise bridge?
It should be going in here soon, sir. I mean, I'll find out. We've already addressed that. I'll come back to you on when and where that's going to go up.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I know it's not part of the agenda, but I just want to take just a brief moment to thank the Virginia Department
Department of Transportation. A few days ago, it came to my attention that on 790 AM, the Tony McCready show, apparently he had made some comments about an exit ramp. It actually started in your area as he was coming to work to do his morning radio talk show, and it came to my attention that members of the Virginia Department of Transportation became aware of the issue. There was a depression in the exit, and they were all over it to get it fixed and repaired. Holly from VDOT reached out to Mr. McCready's office to inform him that they were going to get on it as quickly as possible, especially because of the advancing storm, and likewise how grateful they were, not just for him saying about it, but anybody on his radio program that would speak to it. And I just want to thank the Virginia Department of Transportation and Chris especially for their leadership in reaching out to his office to let him know they're going to fix the problem for what they've done in a speedy manner. I think I had heard the following day, I believe it was, on his program that he was very complimentary of VDOT and was very appreciative. And I think it just goes part and parcel for the great work they're doing there, the momentum they're doing there, the sense of pride they have in their work every day, whether it's the contractors or VDOT themselves. And I just want to thank VDOT and Chris especially, and Holly, and all those that reached out, whether it's to Mr. McCready or whether it's to any constituent throughout our area, that they just are doing a fantastic job with these projects, with the maintenance. And I think it's just part and parcel for why the rest of the state is envious on the great work that we're doing here. So I just want to thank Chris, and on behalf of myself and all we serve with, just thank Chris for great work, and all those at VDOT as well.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I don't risk of being embarrassed, but I'm not sure if Mr. Stevens has been at one of our meetings previously. And if so, do we introduce all new members? Because he was omitted, I think, when you were going around the table earlier.
Yes. This is Scott Stevens. He's the new county administrator for James City County. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm so used to him now that I think he's been everywhere. He's covered James City County very well, and he hadn't been with us very long yet, but he has made great strides and gotten around the community a whole lot, and we really appreciate the hard work you're doing and look forward to many years, many years.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the recognition, and thank you as well.
Any others we missed? Okay. All right. Okay, that covers everything there. Our next meeting will be December 13th, 2018 at 12:30 in the Regional Building. And do I have a motion for adjournment? So moved. Second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. We're adjourned.